Alright, let me talk to you. Yeah! With Bleach Rebirth of Souls being on the horizon, I definitely thought it was time for me to go ahead and drop that Bleach roster prediction video. That I've been holding off for a little bit. Now, Bleach in and of itself has a huge roster of characters that could potentially make it into this game, and a bunch of fan favorites that you'd be crazy not to add. When it comes to people like the Captains, the Espada, it's a whole bunch of them. But I got a few disclaimers before we actually get into this, just to make things a little bit more organized and help me out a little bit when making this list. Now, first off, this list is going to be comprised of 25 characters. Why 25? Well, if you look at the history of Tamsoft, the people that are making this game, they also developed the Arrancar games. Now, I wanted to kind of compare the roster size to the Arrancar games, but not the newest one, basically like the old, or I guess the first one that was on consoles, which was the first Arrancar game. I think it was on PS3. And if I remember correctly, that roster had anywhere from like 18 to 20 something characters. And that was Tamsoft back in the day. So giving them that size plus Bandai funding, I feel like 23 to 25 is a safe bet. And I'm also going to give you 10 DLC characters on top of that. You know, just for, we in the age of DLC packs, it just makes sense. Like 5 DLC, Season 1 and Season 2. Second disclaimer, there's going to be no movie characters on this list, obviously. We're going straight from Arrancar. We're going straight Substitute Soul Reaper all the way to Arrancar, just like the story mode of the game entails it will be. And I'm going to tell y'all now, this is the third disclaimer, a lot of y'all fan favorites might not be on this roster. Some of them might be left as DLC, but you'll see what I mean when we get into this. Now, I'm going to be using the layout that Globku made when he made his roster prediction video, and he put it out to the community, so shout out to Globku for that. But yeah, without further ado, we're going to go over and we're going to get into this list. Now, as you can see, we are over here on the roster, and we already have 5 characters set up here. We have Ichigo, Rukia, Byakuya, Renji, and Uryu. Those are 5 easy ones we can knock out right away. Now, another one we can knock out, obviously Yoruichi gotta be on here. We saw her in the trailer. That's baby girl. It just makes sense if we're going through like the arc. I also want to let it be known that I'm going through these, the way I'm basing this roster is off of like who was most important and detrimental to Ichigo's journey from the beginning of Bleach, or from where they're starting, which is basically Substitute Soul Reaper, all the way up until the end of Arrancar arc. That's why I say a lot of people's favorites might just be DLC, because I feel like if you weren't really in Ichigo's path from Substitute Soul Reaper up until the end of Arrancar, chances of you really being in the game aren't super high unless you're like a really big fan favorite. Now, the next character we gotta bring in is obviously the girl Orihime. Now, Orihime we haven't seen gameplay of, but we do see sneak peeks of her in the trailer. It's a very high possibility she is gonna be a playable character. It wouldn't make sense if you have a Bleach game and you have like the main group, which is Ichigo, Rukia, so Chad, which we're going to talk about in a second, but Chad is also on the playable roster. Or it just makes sense. Like I feel like she has to take up a slot there, you know what I'm saying? Obviously Chad has to be here too. Like I said, it's the main group. You got the main core Rukia rescue team. You got Ichigo there, you got Uryu there, you got Orihime there, you got Chad there, you got Yoruichi. That's the main core group that went to pull up to get Rukia in the first place. So again, it just makes sense. So who's next? Who else but the boy Kisuke? Now, so we do also see Kisuke in the gameplay trailer or in the reveal trailer. We see him using one of his Shikai abilities, so it makes sense that I would assume he's going to be an actual playable character. You most likely are going to have to fight him as Ichigo once he's training Ichigo before they go to rescue Rukia in the first place. So it would just make sense if he's an actual playable character in the game, plus like no bias aside, but already from these couple characters, the two I care about the most is Yoruichi and Kisuke, and I already saw them in the trailer. Those are the 2 characters for the most part I really wanted to see in the game. Now, next character we get into is one of the last characters we see revealed in the trailers. White or White Ichigo, or Zangetsu if you read the manga. It is what it is. Obviously we see him show up in the trailer, so I feel like it's pretty safe to say he's most likely going to be a playable character, especially since he does play a lot of pivotal roles to Ichigo. You're most likely going to be fighting him as Ichigo in certain points of the story. It just makes sense for him to be a character. Now, one character I am leaving off that we did also see in the trailers was Grand Fisher, and you might be thinking, why are you leaving Grand Fisher off? I feel like Grand Fisher is going to be one of those story mode only boss fights, and I feel like there's going to be a couple of those throughout the game, right? And they're most likely going to be left to just the main hollows. Like, you're most likely going to have to fight Fishbone D, right when you get the hollow powers, not the hollow, right when you get the Soul Reaper powers as Ichigo from Rukia, you're most likely gonna have to fight a lot of the mini subset hollows from Substitute Soul Reaper, unless they skip past them. But you're probably gonna have to fight a couple of those as, like, you know, early on Ichigo, and then we're gonna get to like Britt and Fisher. Now, since we're done with a lot of the trailer characters, and for the most part we're done with Substitute Soul Reaper, we're gonna move on to the Soul Society arc now. And if you ask me, someone who I feel like gotta be one of the first people on the list, that boy Ikkaku. Now Ikkaku is, if I'm not mistaken, the first like actual major fight Ichigo gets into once they get into the Soul Society. It's one of the biggest fights he gets into early on. Yeah, keeping the same energy with Ikkaku, obviously we gotta go ahead and add the boy Kenpachi. Like, come on, bro. One of the first captains besides Byakuya that Ichigo fights. Probably one of his other biggest fights in early on in Soul Society. Like, Kenpachi had to make it on this list. There's no way Kenpachi does not. Kenpachi just has too many moments early on from the beginning of Soul Society, even through Arrancar. Like, there's no way you can't not put him on this roster. He has to be there. It's Big Kenny, come on, man. Plus you need the big body with the armor. Kenpachi's just here for it. Like, you can't have a base roster without Kenpachi on it. It just wouldn't make sense, you feel me? Like, come on now. Now the thing is, a lot of people might get mad at this because I don't think a lot of the captains are gonna make it base roster, unfortunately. I think some of the captains might get left off for DLC at a later date, and some probably might not make it in at all, honestly. Like I said, if they're trying to cover the story in a basis of like to introduce people to Bleach, I feel like it would just make sense that they focus mainly on the story path that Ichigo went on. And a lot of the captains, even from Substitute Soul Reaper all the way through Arrancar, a lot of them don't really interact with Ichigo that much. But one of the captains I do think is gonna make it in, unfortunately, is Toshiro. Now I say unfortunately, even though he's like one of the biggest fan favorite characters. I personally don't care about Toshiro. I don't care for him. I know he like the cool ice dragon dude. It's cool. His character's mid, bro. I'm sorry if you. That's my personal bias. His character, he kind of sucks, bro.
I'm not feeling it.
Now next up on the list is the girl Soifon. Now originally Soifon wasn't going to be on here because I figured, you know, while she doesn't have a lot of interactions with Ichigo, she is important to Yoruichi. And I feel like if Yoruichi is going to be in this game, they would have to make a fight for her, right? And the fight, obviously, they would give to her up until like she fight, because she doesn't really have a lot of fights early on up until, you know, they try and jump Aizen. Before then, her only biggest fight is against Soifon. Soifon is the biggest fight Yoruichi has for the most part up until they get to the Arrancar arc and fake Karakura town. So it would just make sense that Soifon is the other character they put in here to kind of give her something to do. And honestly, that's gonna go ahead and wrap up the Soul Society arc. Starting off with the Arrancar arc, we got the boy Shinji. Obviously, I feel like it would be a disservice if Shinji isn't in this game. He's one of the first visors we see. He's the first visor that makes contact with Ichigo. He's the one who brings Ichigo to get training with the other visors in the first place. Like, Shinji's importance to Ichigo throughout the early parts of Arrancar, he's pretty much detrimental to him even like gaining a lot of the power and stuff he gets later on throughout the arc. So it just makes sense. Also, Shinji's a fan favorite as well. If Shinji's here and we're talking about the visor training, we also gotta go and talk about Hiyori. Now Hiyori, again, the same thing as Shinji. While she wasn't like super present, she is like the visor Ichigo trains and fights against while he's trying to get control of his inner hollow during the visor training arc. So it makes sense you might have like a fight with her against like Ichigo going berserk, or Ichigo training against her. Either way, I feel like it would just make sense for her to actually be a character on the roster. Plus, she's not like a super fan favorite, but people do like her a lot, and she does offer like a different play style from a lot of the other characters because of how her sword is. Like, she's more of like a big, like, she's like a tiny girl with the big sword. I feel like you can't have an anime game without those. Like, she's like a bruiser type, you know. Now next up is the character everybody been waiting for, that boy Grimmjow. It just, you can't not put Grimmjow on the main roster. Like, the first thing he does when he's introduced in the series is pull up and hit Ichigo with the 2-piece and a biscuit with no drink. Like, it's just, there's no way he's not gonna be here. And the same thing could be said for Ulquiorra. Again, Ulquiorra, a staple villain during Hueco Mundo. It just, you can't not have him in the game. He's way too detrimental to the fights Ichigo has. Like, these two in particular, Grimmjow and Ulquiorra, way too important to Ichigo during his development throughout Hueco Mundo and going on to Fake Karakura Town. Like they played way too detrimental of a role to not be playable in this game. Now, the one character that is also a part of this that I feel like is kind of a toss-up for me, but I'm gonna put him here anyway, is Yami. Now, the reason Yami is here is because, like, one, I feel like we don't really have a lot of big body characters. If you notice, Sajin isn't on here, and to be honest, I don't think Sajin is gonna get on here, unfortunately. But Yami, I feel like fills that big body role alongside Kenpachi, because Kenpachi most likely is also gonna be a big body, but Yami fulfills it in a different way, where it's like he's not a sword wielder, he'll just mainly be boxing with his hands, but also he's one of the first to, he comes in with Ulquiorra, and when they both come in, you know, they have the interaction with Kisuke, Yoruichi, Orihime, and Chad, and it's like, I feel like it would make sense that he has enough importance to him and enough screen time during those early parts of Arrancar and Hueco Mundo that it would make sense for them to put him in here. Again, he is a toss-up though. I don't really know for sure if they would put him in. He is like a coin flip. They could easily just not. Now, moving on, this next character is someone, you have the biggest hater himself, Noitora. Now, Noitora, I feel like has, again, a lot of importance during Hueco Mundo. He has his fight with Kenpachi. He basically bullies Ichigo for a good bit before they start moving on. Bullies Ichigo and Orihime and Nelio, to be honest, which I call him the biggest hater. It just makes sense. I feel like he's also a character in Soul Resurrection, which is funny because Nell isn't playable in that game, but he is. So I assume they might pull the same thing again. And honestly, I'm also gonna pull the thing where I'm not putting Nelio on this list, which might be surprising to some people, because you would assume so because of her fight with Noitora and the history. But I think if a lot of the games I've looked at in the past for Bleach have taught me anything, a lot of the early ones, for some reason, a lot of them seem to skip Nelio. They don't really have her on the roster, which is very weird, but I could understand it. She ends up getting in like way later on. Like if you're talking about Heat the Soul, the Heat the Soul games don't put her into like, I think this, what, the 5th or 6th entrant? If that, like for the first 4 games, she's nowhere to be found in those games. So I feel like it makes sense if they left her off of here, but she's not going to be gone for long. Now, moving on, the next character we're going to bring up, and this might surprise some people, another Ichigo. Now, you might be thinking, why is there another Ichigo on here? One, it's a Bleach game. I just assume, like when it comes to these anime games, when you see Naruto Storm, there's multiple Narutos. When you see Dragon Ball Zetaverse in any Dragon Ball game, there's multiple Gokus. If you see a One Piece game, there's multiple Luffys. It would just make sense if there is multiple versions of Ichigo in this game, but not just for the sake of there being one. I feel like with the Ichigo we've seen so far, we saw Ichigo when after he first like gets his true Zanpakuto, and then, you know, he pops Bankai against Byakuya. That's basically the Ichigo we've seen all the way up throughout the trailer so far. But that Ichigo from the awakenings we've seen in the game, he pops Bankai as like his big awakening, but we also see clips of him with the broken hollow mask on, and I feel like that's gonna be like another secondary awakening when, like, you know, White takes over and, you know, he starts fighting all crazy and wild. This second Ichigo though, this is the Ichigo I think is gonna be the one that we use to fight against Ulquiorra. I feel like he's gonna have 2 releases as well. The first one is gonna be him actually popping the hollow mask. The second one is going to be him going into Vasto Lorde. I don't think Vasto Lorde in itself will be its own character. I think it's going to be locked behind an awakening, and the same thing with Ulquiorra and his Segunda Etapa form. But it would just make sense if they put another Ichigo in the game, just allow you to pop Hollow Mask with the Bankai and then go straight into Vasto Lorde as his secondary release. You know, that way you have the 2 Ichigos separate from each other and you're not really overlapping anything. It would just make sense to me personally. Ichigo has so much progression throughout there, it's impossible for you to lock that with just one character. You have to make a second character for that. But with that being said, we're pretty much done with Hueco Mundo, and we're moving straight into the fake Karakura Town portion of Arrancar. And as you can see, there's only 4 slots left. This one might get a lot of people kind of hurt, but you'll see my reasonings for a lot of the characters I choose for these last 4 slots, and you might agree with you might not. Just hear me out. Now, starting off this fake Karakura portion is going to be Haribel. Now, Haribel, personally, I think is going to be the only one of the big 3 Espada between her, Baragon, and Stark that is going to make it on this roster. I know Stark fans are going to be upset about that. Trust me, it's okay. Keep with me for a second. But Haribel for right now, I think the main reason I put her on here. One, because she has a playstyle that's a lot different from a lot of the other characters on here, you know, with the water projectiles and the water pillars and stuff like that. And on top of the fact that she has the big fight with Toshiro, which is already on the roster, so it just makes sense that they would, you know, involve that somehow. And it's one of the main fights that people go back and really watch from that portion of Fate Karakura, is between, you know, Shunsui versus Stark, is Toshiro versus Haribel, and it also fills out another female character on the roster as well. Now next up we have Gin. Obviously, Gin, I feel like, had to make it on here. At this point in the story, him and Ichigo have their actual fight. On top of that, once, you know, Aizen starts going a little crazy and they do make it to Fate Karakura, Gin shows his true colors. He does show up a lot throughout the story, but he doesn't really have a lot of screen time until, you know, the Fate Karakura town portion, and until the ending portion of Fate Karakura town in general, once, you know, Ichigo and Aizen are about to have their fight and all that happened. And if Gin is here, obviously we have to bring in Big Bad himself, Aizen. Now, I don't think there's gonna be multiple Aizens, because realistically they could give this Aizen 2 releases if they really wanted to, and they could also play it off in different ways. Like this Aizen, the picture of this Aizen might not be the Aizen we see. We could actually just see masked Aizen once he goes into his cocoon state, and then that Aizen's release could be, you know, once he breaks out. Or they could make it so this is the base Aizen we see, and then his awakening, or one of his releases, is once he goes into cocoon state, and then his final awakening would be once he breaks out the cocoon state. I do think it's pretty safe to say we're most likely gonna get one version of Aizen. It's just depending on how they do it. They could do 2, but for this list, I feel like it's pretty safe to say there's gonna be 1. Now, if you heard everything I just said about Aizen, you know we can't use the 2 Ichigos we have on the roster right now to go up and fight that Aizen. We gonna have to add another Ichigo on the roster, and obviously it gotta be Dangai Ichigo. Now I know what you're thinking, bro, 3 Ichigos on the roster? Technically 4 if you want to count like White Ichigo down there, but like again, it's a Bleach game. We gotta understand, like, a lot of these games, they're gonna have multiple versions of the main character because they're the character that goes through the most progression a lot of the times throughout the series. And Dangai Ichigo, he has to be his own character. You can't equip him with the same stuff as everybody else, because Dangai Ichigo also gives you access to Mugetsu Ichigo, so that obviously got to be his awakening. It just makes sense, bro. He's gonna be the one ending off the roster, the base roster, and I feel like as a base roster, I'm pretty happy with it. There are a couple outliers that I'm like maybe could get swapped out, like Yami. Like I said earlier, Yami could get swapped out. Soifon is another one that's like 50-50 for me. Hiyori and Haribel also are very 50-50, but for the most part I feel like the base roster here is pretty decent, and is what I mean when I said a lot of people's fan favorites might not be in here, a lot of the captains might not be in here, but if you see those yellow squares at the top, and I said earlier, I'm giving you 2 DLC packs. So I'm gonna show you the DLC packs and I'm gonna explain everything. Now for the DLC, we got Neliel, Lisa, Kaname, Stark, Shunsui. Now hear me out. Neliel, like I said earlier, we didn't really have a lot of space for her on the main roster, but also a lot of games I've been seeing haven't really put her in a lot of the early versions of a new Bleach game. A lot of the time they always skip her. But since she is like a really well-known, really liked fan favorite, I figured it makes sense for her to be like one of the first DLC they drop. Lisa, same thing. Lisa isn't a character I would expect to be on the base roster, but in terms of visors, I'd say she is one of the more popular ones, and it will make sense again for her to get on the list. Kaname, obviously Kaname, pretty important character in terms of like Aizen and Gin, but not important enough early on, I'd say, to make it base roster. As you can see, Sajin or Shuhei is on here, and I don't think their fight would be in the game because, like I said, their fight doesn't really directly correlate or affect Ichigo at all. Kaname though would be a very cool character to have into the game. Now Stark, this one kind of hurt me personally because I'm not gonna lie, Stark personally is my favorite Espada, but I know for a fact his fight along with Shunsui, who is below him, isn't very detrimental to Ichigo, like I said, but he would offer a pretty cool playstyle that I could definitely see them just locking behind DLC just because of how he is. Like, he's just a cool character they know people will pay for. Shunsui, again, not really a lot of space for him here, but the thing with Shunsui is I feel like they would do something where they would tease a lot of 1000 Year Blood War stuff with him, as well as a lot of the other characters, that they would do that a lot more for the second pack. Once we get there, I'll show you. But Shunsui, him and Stark have their big fight. It makes sense if him and Stark, you know, have like a double pack or double release type thing, back and forth. They drop the trailers. I definitely could see him being DLC. Like I said, it hurt me not to put him there, but it just makes sense to me. Now starting on to DLC pack 2, we got Old Man Zangetsu, Ginjo, Fullbring Ichigo, or Fullbringer Arc Ichigo I should say, Captain Yamamoto himself, and to end it off, Yuabak. Now, my thought process with this is, well, Old Man Zangetsu I feel like would be pretty interesting just because, one, we already see his model in the game. He does fight throughout the series, and it's not like he doesn't have a release form or whatever. Like, he does have the, you know, there's the fusion of him and White Ichigo that they could use as a release. They also have young Zangetsu that they could use as a release as well. So he has forms and he has, you know, releases and transformations that they could put into the game that would be pretty interesting. He's one of those characters that you could really swap out for anyone. If you wanted to put another visor in there like Rose, you could, or another captain, for instance. Like, if you wanted Komamura to be there, you could do that. Second, we have Ginjo and Fullbringer Arc Ichigo. I'm put these two as a dual pack because if this game does sell well, most likely we are gonna get another one that's gonna be covering basically Fullbringer Arc all the way through 1000 Year Blood War, and I could see them using this pack as a way to kind of tease that with Ginjo and Fullbringer Arc Ichigo. Not a lot of people may like that arc, but I feel like he would be a pretty cool character to add. Fullbringer Arc Ichigo, for the most part, is a lot of people's like favorite design of Ichigo, especially once he pops his Bankai in Fullbringer. That's probably Ichigo, one of Ichigo's best fits, I'm not gonna lie to you, so it just makes sense. Yeah, it's another Ichigo on the roster, but it's an Ichigo that's different enough to where like he could differentiate himself from the other ones. He could play a little bit differently, and like I said, he is a fan favorite Ichigo character. Again, you could swap him out, but for my list, this is pretty much where I'm at. Now, going down to the other two, Captain Yamamoto. You might think, well, why isn't he all main roster or DLC pack 1? Like I said, they could be teasing a second game with this pack. And that pack in that game is going to be going through Fullbringer to 1000 Year Blood War. But also, I don't think this game is dropping until the end, or somewhere close, or somewhere around the ending half of the 1000 Year Blood War Core 3. So it would make sense if they use this Yamamoto to kind of tease that. Plus, I feel like Yamamoto, if it's Yamamoto based off of like what we've seen in Fate Karakura Town, yeah, he would have Ryujin Jaka and have the flames and stuff. But if it's Yamamoto from 1000 Year Blood War, he has a lot more to offer with, you know, Zanka no Tachi East, West, North, South, all the different powers he showed off during the first couple cores of the Bleach 1000 Year Blood War anime that people would be hyped for. A lot more hype than just regular Ryujin Jaka with the flames and stuff like that. He'd have a lot more to him, and it makes sense that they put him in here. And the same with Yuha. Now, Yuha being the big bad, they could tease him in this game. Now, you might think, well, if he's gonna be the boss of the next game, why would they save him from there? You're right. I feel like it'd be a pretty decent tease, like I said, especially for the ending of 1000 Year Blood War Core 3, it'd get a lot of money. With everything we've seen Yuha do up to this point in the anime, they have enough material to work with to where it wouldn't spoil a lot of what's gonna happen in the final core, but most likely everything he's done up to this point in the first couple cores he could use and you could see, and it'd be a pretty decent character. This for a pack 2 is a pretty decent start, and this as a roster overall for a 35 character roster, this is just where my brain is, this is my thought process is, this is my roster for the game. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. You guys can make your own roster. Let me know. We can have a discussion about it. I think it'd be pretty cool. But yeah, with that being said, that's gonna be my roster. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. More Bleach content on the way. That's gonna be from me, and I'm out. So, boy.